I was 18 years old and needed money for my studies, so I decided to take up a job as a pizza delivery guy. After working for about 4 months, something really scary happened during one of my deliveries. One evening, I received a delivery request to an old town not far from the pizza shop. It was a usual night, and I didn't think much of it, even though the town looked quite old. I hopped into my car and headed to the address. When I arrived at the house, it was nearly 11 p.m., and I was getting tired. I noticed that the front door was already open, which was strange. I knocked on the door and said, "Hello, sir, this is your pizza." But there was no response. I tried again, but still, no one answered. I spotted a table in the drawing room and decided to go inside and leave the pizza there. But when I turned around to leave, I saw a man pointing a gun at me. I was frozen in shock, not knowing what to do. He yelled, "What are you doing here?" Hands in the air. I quickly explained that I was a pizza delivery guy and showed him the pizza. He got really angry and said he didn't order any pizza. He continued shouting loudly, and that's when I realized my mistake. I had mixed up the addresses, and I was in the wrong house. I apologized and told him I didn't mean to intrude. I simply got the address wrong. Thankfully, he lowered his gun and told me to leave immediately. I didn't waste a second and ran out of his house as fast as I could. I delivered the pizza to the correct address, but I couldn't stop shaking the whole way. It was a truly terrifying experience, and I was so relieved it didn't end in a much scarier way. I used to work as a pizza delivery boy at a local pizza shop. The pay wasn't great, but I was saving up for college. On weekends, our shop closed at midnight. One Saturday night, around 11:45 p.m., we got an order for 8 large pizzas. My boss usually didn't accept orders after 11:30, but this one was big, so he insisted I take it. I wasn't thrilled about working late, but I hoped for a good tip given the size of the order and the distance. After the pizzas were ready, I drove to the address, which was nearly 30 minutes away. I reached the place around 1 a.m., parked my car, and looked at the house. It was impressive but isolated, high up on a hill, and there were no lights on. This seemed odd for someone who ordered 8 pizzas. As I got out of the car, I noticed the front yard was overgrown with tall grass, indicating it hadn't been maintained for months. That was the first strange thing. The second oddity was a note taped to the door. It said, "Dear Pizza Boy, please come in. Do not ring the doorbell. Thank you." I felt uneasy. Something didn't feel right. I rang the doorbell despite the note. There was no response. I knocked and listened but heard nothing. I started getting a bad feeling about this delivery, and I thought about leaving, but my boss would be upset if I returned without payment. As I reached for the door handle, I remembered a recent incident where a kid named Billy was abducted not far from here. It made me cautious, so I didn't enter. I rang the doorbell again, and this time, I heard a woman's voice from inside, saying, "Come in. I'm upstairs." I hesitated, but decided to enter, although I kept the door open. The inside of the house was messy, with piles of garbage everywhere. I placed the pizzas on a table. Most of the lights were off, except for one in the room I was in and another upstairs. The woman's voice came from the top of the staircase, but something felt off about it. It sounded like a man trying to imitate a woman. I decided to leave, and as I reached the front door, I saw a shadowy figure move into the high grass outside. It had a tiny head, like a baby's, but a full-grown body. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt it watching me. Terrified, I went back inside, locked the door, and realized I had left my phone in the car. I needed to find another way out. I headed down a hallway, hoping to find a back door and get to my car. Somehow, I made it out of that eerie place, got in my car, and drove away as fast as I could. It was the scariest experience of my life. I was almost 20 years old and working part-time as a pizza delivery person. One evening, I received a delivery request to a small suburban area that I hadn't visited before. As I approached the address, I noticed something peculiar about the house. The front door was slightly ajar, which struck me as odd. I knocked on the door and cautiously called out, "Hello." However, there was no response. It was then that I peered through the crack in the door and saw a person sitting inside. This strange scenario immediately raised my curiosity, and I gently pushed the door open a bit more to get a better view. To my astonishment, I discovered a middle-aged woman who appeared somewhat disheveled. She was tied to a chair and had a blindfold over her eyes. Despite her predicament, she nodded slightly as if to acknowledge my presence and pointed her head towards the nightstand beside her. On the nightstand, I found an intriguing note along with some money. The note read something like, "This is our 20th anniversary, and this was my fantasy. Please feel free to look around, but don't touch anything. And you can keep the change. My husband is hiding and watching, so don't attempt anything." Alongside the note, there was a $20 tip. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease and discomfort. This was, by far, one of the most bizarre situations I had ever encountered while making a pizza delivery. The room itself was dimly lit, and the house seemed oddly quiet. I glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone else. Despite my curiosity, I decided that it was best not to linger any longer in this eerie environment. I swiftly took the money, left the pizzas on the bed, and began backing out of the room slowly. My instincts were telling me that it was time to make my exit. Later, I learned about a murder that had occurred in that same suburban area, which sent shivers down my spine. The thought of what could have happened during that peculiar pizza delivery left me deeply unsettled. From that day on, I kept this unsettling story to myself, and I made the decision to quit my pizza delivery job immediately.